These are the latest scientific facts related to DMT research. Nothing of what follows is an opinion or theory of the creator of the video or anybody else. Every single one of the sentences that follow were taken from research articles that went through the standard peer-reviewing stages needed for a publication. The references and an index of contents can be found in the video description below. N,N-dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, is an alkaloid widely found in plants and animals. Alkaloid, class of nitrogenated organic compounds of plant origin with pronounced physiological activity in humans. It is best known for producing brief and intense psychedelic effects when ingested. Increasing evidence suggests that the DMT produced in the body plays important roles for a number of processes in the periphery and central nervous system and may act as a neurotransmitter. DMT appears to have limited neurotoxicity and few adverse effects. Because of its role in nervous system signaling, DMT may be a useful experimental tool in exploring how the brain works and may also be a useful clinical tool for the treatment of anxiety and psychosis. Endogenous DMT. Endogenous versus exogenous. An endogenous molecule is a molecule that is produced in the body opposite to an exogenous one. Even though DMT was synthesized for the first time in 1931, it was only in 1956 that Stephen Sara, a pioneering Hungarian chemist and psychiatrist, extracted DMT from the Mimosa hostilis plant and administered the extract to himself intramuscularly. This sequence of events formed the link between modern science and the historical use of many DMT-containing plants as a cultural and religious ritual sacrament. The discovery of a number of hallucinogens in the 1950s and observations of their effects on perception, affect, and behavior prompt the hypothesis that the syndrome known as schizophrenia may be caused by an error in metabolism that produced such hallucinogens in the human brain, forming a schizo or psychotoxin. The only known hallucinogens isolated were those derived from tryptophan, DMT, and 5-methoxy-DMT. Later, the pathways for their endogenous synthesis in mammalian species, including humans, were described. Exogenous DMT from plants. Major plant genera containing DMT include Phalaris, Delosperma, Acacia, Desmodium, Mimosa, Virola, and Cichotria. But DMT has been found even in apparently innocuous sources such as leaves of citrus plants and in the leaves, seeds, and inner bark of Mimosa tenuiflora. DMT has become of interest because when ingested it causes brief, episodic visual hallucinations at high concentrations. DMT is one of the major psychoactive compounds found in various shamanic compounds. Ayahuasca, huasca, yagué, used in South America for centuries and has more recently found its way into Europe and North America as a recreational drug. Recreational use of DMT. Most hallucinogens such as lysergic acid diethylamide or LSD and 2,5-dimethoxy-4-methylamphetamine cause sensory distortion, depersonalization at high doses, whereas some compounds such as DMT found in ayahuasca, psilocybin in mushrooms, or mescaline in peyote cause episodic visual effects. In the late 1990s, Rick Strassman conducted the first human research with hallucinogens in 20 years, examining the physiological effects and self-reports from people receiving DMT in carefully controlled settings. Strassman concluded that DMT is a powerful tool for self-discovery and understanding consciousness, which may have helped to drive interest in recreational use of DMT and related tryptamine hallucinogens. In recent years, recreational use of DMT has been increasing. For example, it was reported that 31% of recreational DMT users endorse psychological benefits as the main reason for consumption. A bad trip? It is unclear what proportion of users of hallucinogenic tryptamines have adverse effects serious enough for hospitalization, but it seems that the synthetic hallucinogenic compounds, such as 25I-N-bome, may be more dangerous than the plant-derived compounds. Street drugs mostly contain powdered DMT, whereas ayahuasca also contains harmine-related compounds which limit toxic effects. Harmaline is a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, or MAOI. This molecule inhibits the action of the MAO enzyme, in detail later. Various plants contain harmaline, including Peganum harmala and Banisteriopsis caapi. However, aside from acute cardiovascular effects, there have been no consistent reports of toxic effects of long-term use of DMT in the literature. It is likely that most adverse effects of hallucinogens are psychological effects, such as intense fear, paranoia, anxiety, grief, and depression that can result in putting the user or others in physical harm or danger. Anecdotal reports describe psychologically challenging experiences with DMT and other psychedelic compounds. The rates of occurrence of these effects have not been properly accounted for. However, in the case of psilocybin, about 30% of laboratory experiences include psychologically challenging experiences. Even though DMT may not produce physical toxicity, severe psychological adverse effects can occur. Without more data on the recreational use of this class of compounds, it is not possible to conclude whether the synthetic hallucinogens are indeed more toxic, or whether the social context may contribute to the effects. Synthesis and function of endogenous DMT. Endogenous DMT, 1, is synthesized from the essential amino acid tryptophan, 2, which undergoes decarboxylation to tryptamine. Tryptamine, 3, is then transmethylated by the indole N-methyltransferase INMT enzyme, which catalyzes the addition of methyl groups, resulting in the production of N-methyltryptamine, NMT, number 4, and DMT. Although widespread biological presence of DMT is acknowledged, the biological function of DMT remains a mystery. DMT is found in low concentrations in brain tissue. DMT concentrations can be localized and elevated in certain instances, for example, stress and hypoxia. Previously, endogenous DMT was thought to exist at concentrations too low to produce pharmacological effects, but that has changed due to findings that suggest that DMT may have a role in normal and/or diseased physiology and psyche. What that role may be has not yet been established. There has been a great deal of speculation about the role of DMT in naturally occurring altered states of consciousness, such as psychosis, dreams, creativity, imagination, religious and/or spiritual phenomena, and near-death experiences. Additionally, DMT may play a role in waking reality. Waking reality is created in a similar way to altered states, except that the normal state correlates with events in the physical world. Thus, waking reality can be thought of as a tightly regulated psychedelic experience, and altered states arise when this regulation is loosened somehow. Data from early studies of DMT suggested that DMT may be a schizotoxin, and various authors hypothesized that DMT may be a key factor in causing schizophrenia. This hypothesis is no longer accepted, but it is still thought that DMT may play a role in psychotic symptoms. Similarly, DMT was thought to be neurotoxic, but more recent research suggests that DMT may actually be neuroprotective. More recently, it was proposed that endogenous DMT may have an anxiolytic role based on the reported subjective effects of DMT administered in low doses, which will result in comparable concentrations and biological actions to those of endogenous DMT. Sensory alterations commonly described by people taking DMT occur only when relatively high concentrations of DMT are administered. These high concentrations are similar to those observed in the synapse when endogenous DMT is released. Exogenous DMT action. The subjective effects of intravenous administration of DMT peak at about 5 minutes and are gone by 30 minutes. Intramuscular effects of DMT hydrochloride or DMT fumarate have a rapid onset within 2 to 5 minutes and can last 30 to 60 minutes, and the effects are generally less intense than intravenous or inhalation routes of administration. The hallucinogenic effects of DMT in the formulation of ayahuasca generally appear within 60 minutes, peak at 90 minutes, and can last for approximately 4 hours. Typical doses of smoked or inhaled freebase DMT are 40 to 50 milligrams, although those may be as high as 100 milligrams. The onset of these doses of smoked DMT is rapid, similar to that of intravenous administration, but lasts less than 30 minutes. Smoked DMT effects are extremely intense. Gathering and storage. It is of interest that DMT can enter the brain with the help of 3 different active transport mechanisms so that it can be compartmentalized and stored, which suggests that DMT may have a biological role. Processes for the transport of glucose and amino acids are given similar biological priority, which may suggest that DMT is present in the body for more than its psychedelic effects, such as an adaptive role in biological processes or a universal role in cellular protective mechanisms. As previously mentioned, it has been hypothesized that high local concentrations of DMT can occur within neurons and can potentially be widely produced in peripheral organs, especially in the lungs. Exogenous DMT bioavailability. DMT is not orally active. This is likely due to rapid degradation by peripheral monoamino oxidase, MAO, the main enzyme responsible for catalyzing its degradation. In order for DMT to be bioavailable, oral formulations such as ayahuasca contain Banisteriopsis caapi and other Harmala alkaloids that act as MAO inhibitors, or MAO eyes. On average, a 100 milliliter dose of ayahuasca contains about 24 milligrams of DMT. The effects observed and the biochemical and physiological parameters measured in these studies add needed insight into the role and function of endogenous DMT. However, we must distinguish the effects of exogenously administered DMT from that which may be observed from its natural role as an endogenous substance. Exogenous administration of a dose of DMT represents an overdose of a naturally occurring compound that may, when administered in this manner, exert a more complex effect in the body. However, this could also be true of any physiological change that produced a normal elevation in endogenous DMT, such as a response to stress or hypoxia. However, in the case of endogenous release, the entire process still remains under a greater degree of biochemical control and response, with the elevation possibly occurring in only certain brain areas or systems. Degradation and elimination. A small fraction of endogenous DMT is excreted in urine as the parent compound. DMT is primarily degraded by MAO. Endogenous DMT detection in body fluids. DMT as an endogenous compound can be measured in human body fluids, including blood, urine, and cerebrospinal fluid. It is commonly thought that the adrenal gland and lungs are the most common places for the highest amount of DMT production. DMT as a therapeutic. There has been a renewed interest in using hallucinogenic drugs as therapeutics in clinical research to address depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder, the physiological impacts of terminal illness, prisoner recidivism, and substance abuse disorders including alcohol and tobacco. Most of these studies have examined the use of LSD, psilocybin, or ayahuasca instead of DMT alone. Positive results from ayahuasca studies suggest evidence for a potential antidepressant effect for DMT. However, ayahuasca is a complex mixture containing MAO eyes, Harmala alkaloids, which as a class of drugs have also been used alone to treat depression. Thus, it is impossible to say from such studies that DMT itself or the elevation of other brain neurotransmitters in combination is responsible for the perceived positive clinical effects. DMT has been shown to exert anti-anxiety, antipsychotic properties, which has suggested that the possible positive symptoms observed in schizophrenia may be mediated by the effects of endogenous DMT. These findings do not necessarily support the conclusion that DMT is useful for treatment of anxiety or mental illness, however. The possible use of DMT as an aid to psychiatric therapy has been proposed by numerous investigators. Furthermore, DMT does not appear to be related to the onset of schizophrenia, since it seems to be detected more so in healthy controls compared to patients. However, at this point, the necessary data to support such proposals have not been presented, and it would be premature to propose that DMT will become commonly used for clinical purposes. Effects on other organ systems. Cardiovascular system. Single doses of DMT produce rapid onset of marked effects on the sympathetic nervous system, including increased heart rate and blood pressure. DMT has been speculated to aid in extending the survival of the brain. It was suggested that during physical signals of agony, lungs synthesize large amounts of DMT and can release DMT into arterial blood within seconds. DMT is taken then to the brain, and by the action of specific transport mechanisms mentioned earlier, is taken from the blood to the inside of the brain, where it can potentially keep the brain alive longer without the brain having to produce DMT on its own. Exogenous DMT-like psychedelic effects are in essence similar to subjective reports provided after clinical death and near-death experiences. Strassman believes DMT to be very likely involved in the dying process. Endocrine system. DMT increased levels of corticotropin, cortisol, prolactin, and growth hormone when administered to human volunteers. Immune system and neurotoxicity. It has been hypothesized that DMT might increase activity of the immune system and could prove useful as a treatment for cancer. Evidence for this hypothesis is not clear. In addition, others have proposed that DMT and related compounds are anti-inflammatory and reported that DMT inhibited production of pro-inflammatory compounds and increased levels of the anti-inflammatory compound interleukin-10. Summing up, DMT is a compound found widely across the plant and animal kingdoms. The wide use of DMT in the form of ayahuasca for many years has led to a number of studies focusing on adverse health effects or potential benefits of ayahuasca use. There have been few reports of adverse health consequences. There is little sign of tolerance or dependence to DMT, except to the cardiovascular and endocrine effects, which actually could be viewed as the primary adverse effects. DMT may be an agent of significant adaptive mechanisms that can also serve as a promising tool in the development of future medical therapies. There have been proposals that DMT may be a useful treatment for anxiety, substance abuse, inflammation, or for cancer. Experimental studies have been few, and it is premature to conclude that DMT may have clinically relevant uses. Conclusion. It is evident that we have too long ignored the field of hallucinogen research in all of its potential aspects. This is especially true if continuing research demonstrates a clear role for one of its more prominent members, DMT, as an endogenous regulator of brain function. It is my opinion that these and many other possible approaches and hypotheses regarding DMT and other psychedelics are research endeavors that have great potential and are worthy of attention and support. If the politics of any one nation forbid it, perhaps others will take up the challenge to further the knowledge of our own potential and the further development and understanding of what we prize as our most unique human characteristic, the unexplored possibilities of the mind. Highlights: N,N-dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, is an endogenous compound in both plants and animals. Subjective effects of DMT are mediated by several neurotransmitter systems. DMT may act as a neurotransmitter. DMT has limited neurotoxicity and may have therapeutic significance.